Hi everyone, this is Adam Klein, Global Graduate Director, faculty member at New Ventures West. This is episode 4 of our podcast, Stepping In, a podcast where we delve into how integral coaching can address some of the most pressing issues we face as individuals, as communities, and as stewards of our planet. Today we'll explore the nature, impact, and development of systems. Whether family, organizational, or social, we all belong to many systems. I'm joined by Director of Enrollment, Jessica Mina, and our special guest, Kristin Cobble, who is co-founder and president of Groupaya, a San Francisco-based network consultancy that helps leaders, teams, organizations, and networks work together more skillfully to create their future. Kristin has an extensive background in organizational development and is a huge Kansas Jayhawks basketball fan. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, Adam. Good to be here.
One of the first questions I wrote down was, what has you be interested in systems? And what is a system in your mind?
Oh, wow. We live in systems. Our whole lives take place in systems. They begin in the system of our family, and then the system of our school environment, and the system of our friends, and then our college, and then our workplace and our communities, and even the nations we live in. So I've had an eye for seeing how systems are broken and seeing how systems are not providing for human beings what they could be. So I've been interested in trying to improve systems really since I was in high school. I think one of my more dramatic examples, and it was part of what set me on the path to doing what I do today, is my first job was in my father's dental office, and everyone there loved their work. My parents spent a lot of time at the dinner table as I was growing up talking about how do we make the environment better for our clients. In other words, they didn't even call them patients, they called them clients. How do we make the environment better for our employees? And they created an environment where the employees were really fulfilled and getting great meaning and joy at work. And so then I went off to college, and my first job, summer after freshman year, was with an investment banking firm in downtown Boston. And it was just shocking to me to see how much people hated their jobs and how they were basically just punching the clock and waiting for 5 o'clock so they could go home and live their real life. And it just was so sad to me that they were spending so many hours every week in this place where they were miserable.
Right.
So that was when I really started turning from thinking about how do we make the system called the U.S. government better to getting really interested in how do we make the system we call work better.
So there's the two things, though, there, right? There's a person who goes to work, and they're not finding it to be something that's satisfying, and they're just waiting to punch the clock and leave home. And then there's the environment in which that they're in which they're doing that. And for some reason that you gravitated toward the system rather than the person, or do you see those two things connected? You see what I'm going with?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. They're very connected. And I mean, when I was in college, I thought about being a therapist, but for me, one-on-one change to try to make the world a better place was just too slow. And absolutely, systems cannot change if the individuals do not change. So you can't work a system without working with the individuals. But in my experience, unless you're working with the top leader one-on-one, the CEO one-on-one, individual development has more limited impact than if you develop, for example, a leadership team's capacity to think about the whole organization and to lead the whole organization, or if you develop an organization's capacity to do new things. So it's not an either or. And in fact, the way that I work with leaders has, in my 20s and maybe early 30s, it was more focused on the systems. And now, as a result of New Ventures West, it's actually a much more blended approach of individual integral development within the context of also working to develop the system capacity.
I'm curious, though, on this note of systems, what in particular is a unique thing in working with the system as distinct from the individual? Like, what do you get to do that is exciting for you or neat for you, or, you know, really is new territory in terms of working with the system as distinct from the person?
Yeah. So my favorite way to work with a leader is to actually sit in on, at least in the first 6 months of working with them, sit in on their weekly leadership team meeting and see them in action. And during that meeting, I literally draw a line down the middle of a page, and on the right-hand side, and this is multiple pages of notes, I'm writing what's being said by whom, so it's kind of a script of the meeting. And on the left-hand side, I'm writing comments and questions. And immediately after the meeting, we then go into a coaching session. And I have all this data because I wasn't facilitating the meeting, I was observing it, and I was watching very carefully both to what's being said and not said. And so then the work in the coaching session is to help them see what's getting in their way of really creating a leadership team. Because usually leadership teams aren't leaders for the whole of the organization. They're leaders for the individual functions in the organization. And they're usually not teams. So if the leader can learn how to run his or her meetings in a way that taps into the collective intelligence of that leadership team on behalf of running the whole organization, they can greatly reduce their burden, because so often they feel like they're the only ones that are thinking about the whole. Maybe the CFO to some extent, at least from a financial perspective, but not necessarily the business. So for me, helping them learn how to be in a meeting and how to call out their leadership team is so joyful, because what happens is the leadership team, their whole game, it's like we're not just making the CEO a better leader, we're making the entire leadership team better leaders. And then they go out into their functions and teach their leadership teams, or model for their leadership teams, or coach their leadership teams to do what they're learning in their boss's leadership team. And once they're actually like really acting as a leadership team, and they are, you know, having quarterly offsites, taking the time to think about the strategy and the big picture of the organization, once they're like really clear about where are we trying to go, how are we trying to get there, then helping them to lead organization-wide change. I mean, it's just amazing, because really what the journey is, Adam, is it's a journey of helping leaders to create work environments where people can bring all of themselves to work, which means you're getting more creativity, more risk-taking, more innovative ideas, faster decision-making, better results.
Yeah.
So it's creating an environment. It's teaching the leaders how to develop the capacity to create an environment where their leadership team can really show up and really partner with them in thinking about the whole.
That's beautiful. And what's one of the ways that you've seen helpful in leaders bringing in the collective intelligence of the whole?
The simplest thing to say is that so often the leaders at the top have gotten there because they're really good at making decisions. They're willing to ask people to work hard. They're good at making stuff happen, right? Yeah. And often it's surprising how often they're actually micromanagers, how often their leadership teams actually feel really disempowered. And so part of why they're not thinking about the whole is it's just easier if I focus on my function, because, you know, he doesn't really want to hear what I have to say about the whole. So there's so often someone at the top who actually, even at the same time that they complain about having the burden of the company on their shoulders, and they're having health issues, and they're not sleeping enough, and they're taking sleeping pills to help them sleep, and all of that stuff. So often, if you can help them to explore, why am I so afraid of letting other people have a say, then they can uncover, oh wow, I'm really afraid of looking stupid. And I'm afraid that if I ask for help in thinking through something, people aren't going to respect me as much. So then, working with them to design behavioral experiments where they try on new things in the next week's weekly meeting and all the other meetings they have in between, and then write about it, reflect on it. How did that go? What happened in you? What happened in the other? And then once we do a few weeks of behavioral experiments and collecting data and finding out more about what are the true barriers to enacting these new behaviors, then we turn it into the language that New Ventures West uses, which is a practice. So an ongoing practice for them to play with for at least a 3-month period, and often these just become lifetime practices. But in answer to your question, like, what's an example? Like, for me, every time a leader says to me after a strategy offsite, or after a weekly meeting, or after they've done, something with their team and I wasn't there, and they say to me, I cannot believe how good my team is. It is just thrilling for me, because usually in the initial stages of my trying to encourage them to tap into the intelligence of their leadership team, they are terrified, white knuckles. That's actually a lot of the work that we do, is helping leaders. And then once they've figured it out, leadership teams, helping them figure out how to create the space for other people to contribute.
Yeah, you said the word tap a few times, tap into the wisdom of the organization. So it strikes me that there's this vast resource of wisdom and competency and capacity that is nascent.
Yeah, and it's interesting, a lot of organizations have a bias around the head and the cognitive function and thinking and analysis. And, some of the things that we bring in are around the heart, and are around affect and emotions. And that's often a not very developed capacity. Like on a leadership team, usually the head of HR has some of that. Not always, though, interestingly.
Right. Yeah. Jess, I want to bring you in and see if you have any questions for Kristin or things that are coming up for you as you're listening to her talk.
Yeah, so beautiful to hear about these transformations that you're seeing happening. And one of the things that I heard you say about one of the things that you do is to help leaders create the conditions where their teams can bring more of themselves to the work. And thinking about how that really aligns with the work that we do at New Ventures West, where we encourage people to bring more of themselves to life. We know in our work that that when people become more alive, yes, there's more joy. Yes, there's more excitement. There's more happiness and all of that. And then sometimes there's more of this other stuff as well. More awareness sometimes in the ways in which suffering has been occurring. And so I'm curious about, do you see that sort of thing come up as well when you work on increasing this sort of awareness with your leaders and their teams?
Absolutely. And in terms of helping a system be able to become more generative, and one of the key skills is what I will call productive conversation or courageous conversation. Sometimes it's called crucial conversations, but it's that ability to be in a conversation where we are speaking our truth with a small t, not a capital T, but our individual truths. And we are talking about the elephants in the room that everyone has been too afraid to speak of in a either team setting or even we've done this in 200, 300, 400 person meetings sometimes. So like really developing the capacity to be with what is, to be with what's not working, and to not get so defended in those conversations and not get so triggered in those conversations, and to learn to approach them with curiosity and compassion so that we're out of blame, which reduces defensiveness, and we're into, okay, what's really happening here? And, oh, I am feeling really triggered right now. Why am I so defensive? So developing that capacity. So Jessica, it is frequent that in meetings that I'm a part of, that some tears are shed in a meeting, and more often by men than women, interestingly, and often it's like a bigger deal for them because it's not something they're used to doing. But part of what we do is, by having a consultant in the room, a coach in the room, it creates a safety for some things to come out, for some pain to come out. And then it's just beautiful what happens, because in my experience, when the truth is spoken with a small t in a compassionate way, it's like all this energy has been like holding this truth. And when we actually say it out loud, it's like energy can then move through that part of the body, can move through that psychic part of the organization, can move through that part of the head that's been holding it. And then something else can emerge. And then there's new understanding. And there's potentially from that new ideas about what's the right action to take here.
Really beautiful, yeah.
That is beautiful. And it strikes me that the power of that, not just in organizational systems, but family systems or any system that we're a part of.
Yes.
And this has me be curious about the question of, in what ways have you seen, you've been speaking about working with the leadership and how that then can affect the system and drawing on and tapping into the wisdom of the whole. But what about when the, so to speak, the subordinates or the for lack of a better way of putting it, the bottom of the system affects the top?
It's a fantastic question, and I love Barry Oshry's work, and I use it often and have been since my 20s, just the ideas of it, which is his whole career has been about trying to understand the dynamics in systems between tops, middles, and bottoms. And sometimes people are very triggered by the words tops, middles, and bottoms, but it's actually quite useful to describe power dynamics in systems. And I have to say, inside of organizations, change can happen anywhere. Bottoms definitely can drive change, so can middles. However, if the top doesn't support it, it can't last very long. And I have seen, actually, unfortunately, I have seen amazing, enlightened, practically tops create incredible organizations. And then when they leave, if the next CEO who's brought in has a more hierarchical, controlling kind of mentality, it's amazing how quickly the organization begins to mimic that, even if people individually are very pained by it and don't want to. If that's how they start being rewarded, as long as they stay at that organization, it's really hard for them to continue on with the kinds of behaviors that really tap into the intelligence of the system. So I actually feel in societal change, which we've done some of at Group Haya, the bottom of the system has more potential to change the system than in organizational change. And the reason for that is that the bottom of the system in society, they're not employees. So they're not beholden the way that inside of organizations, it's like, if you don't like it, leave, Right. But in society, the top can't say that to the bottom. So, but to give you, actually just this weekend, I was in a dialogue on black-white race issues with 4 women's circles, and a woman there was talking about, I don't know if you all have heard about tempered radicals, but there is a woman named Deborah Meyerson who I didn't know about her. She's a sociologist at Stanford, and she is studying change agents inside of organizations who try to change the system, but not so much that they get fired. So hence she calls them tempered radicals.
Fascinating.
And one of the most beautiful examples of it in her research, and she actually did the academic research to study this, was an African-American man who wanted to get Silicon Valley to hire more African-Americans and people of color. And so I don't know what company he was working at, if it was Cisco or HP, I have no idea. But whatever large company he was working at, he started approaching hiring managers and saying to them, if I can bring you 2 or 3 qualified candidates who are people of color, are you willing to look at them? And because of that, they hired a lot more than they would have. I don't know if you're aware of the research that when hiring managers get resumes with a name that sounds African American, the chances of that person getting a face-to-face interview are much lower than if it sounds white. So his act of going to the managers opened doors and led to people getting jobs that probably wouldn't have even gotten the first interview. So that is an example of people at the bottom being able to affect change. That was industry change. It wasn't, well, it was also organizational change. So people at the bottom, people in the middle can affect change.
It's inspiring to hear you talk about it, honestly. And to hear, well, it comes so naturally to you, the stories and the energy around it, because you're in it day to day, and inspiring to think about, like in the hiring example, of the effect of one person on a system and on an industry.
Right.
And I think for a lot of us to take that to heart, that we can often feel resigned to the fact, well, that this is just the way things are, and who am I to make a difference?
Right. Yes.
But when we can identify something and take action on it, the ripples effects that it can create.
Exactly. And so often bottoms feel done to. I have that in quotation marks. Like they just feel like they're at the effect of the system. Everything rolls downhill. They never get to have a say, which is so ironic because bottoms often are having the most contact with customers. So they actually have the most to teach the rest of the organization. And it can dramatically change how intelligent the organization is. So when bottoms, I love actually, Barry Ushry has, he's written poems on seeing systems, and I love, in mixed company, meaning we've got tops, middles, and bottoms in the room, quoting him, reading what the experience is to be a bottom versus a middle versus a top, and the challenges of each one of the levels, because each one is challenged. And then what's the opportunity? How do we break through this?
Well, I have more questions, but Jess, is there something that's striking you that you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, just what the story that you just told about, or you just alluded to, reading poetry in a room full of, middle managers, and I have to know more about that.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, actually, Diane Corey was a mentor of mine in my 20s, and I learned from her the gift of sharing poetry at just the right moment. Because talk about different intelligences. Poetry not only can speak to the heart, but it also can speak at a spiritual level and definitely at a cognitive level. And no, I'm always collecting poems, and love bringing them in at just the right moment. There's actually one, I wonder if I can find it right now. Mm-hmm. And this is an example of, I read this to a leadership team, I guess it was a year ago, we were doing work on what really is your purpose as a system. What are we really up to here? what are we really trying to do? And they sort of had a choice where they could be going in a direction that would not be good for the planet, or they could go in a direction that is good for the planet. And this is a biotech company. And this was a poem that I read after they made the decision. So it's called Grace in the Great Turning. It's a Joanna Macy poem. When you act on behalf of something greater than yourself, you begin to feel it acting through you with a power that is greater than your own. This is grace. Today, as we take risks for the sake of something greater than our separate individual lives, we are feeling graced. Those with whom and on whose behalf we act give us strength and eloquence and staying power we didn't know we had. We just need to practice knowing that and remembering that we are sustained by each other. Our true power comes as a gift, like grace, because in truth, it is sustained by others. If we practice drawing on the wisdom and beauty and strengths of our fellow humans and our fellow species, we can go into any situation and trust that the courage and intelligence required will be supplied.
Well, there we go. Well, thank you, Kristin. So this has been Adam Klein, Global Graduate Director and Faculty Member at New Ventures West. And I've been joined by Enrollment Director Jessica Mina and our special guest, Kristin Cobble. And this has been another episode of the podcast, Stepping In. Please spread the news by sharing this podcast on social media and let us know what you're thinking by emailing us at steppingin@newventureswest.com. Until next time, take care.